Spring 2021 launch party reading featuring contributors to the newest issue of Santa Monica Review, on sale now and on its way to subscribers. I'm your host, Andrew Tonkovich, editor of the magazine, saying thanks for purchasing tickets to support the work of the magazine, a project of Santa Monica College. Very big thanks to engineer Joy Bice and to review founder Jim Crusoe and to design and distribution staff at the college. It's been 6 months, friends, since we celebrated the fall 2020 issue, and here's hoping that by October we can assemble in the Edie Theater in Santa Monica for an in-person celebration. Our program tonight is curated for the online experience, which means we move quickly, efficiently, and thanks to Joy, elegantly. I will introduce our welcomer and ask you to reference the bio notes for our amazing contributors available in both hard copy and at our website. Following Leslie Brody, our five readers will take the screen in the order advertised and share their work with you, followed by the next contributor. In order, Tim, Lindsay, Jenny, Leland, and Laura. This event is being recorded and soon will be linked via our Santa Monica Review website. Now, Leslie Brody with a welcome. I've long admired her writing and am thrilled at the amazing reception given her newest biography, Sometimes You Have to Lie, The Life and Times of Louise Fitzhugh, renegade author of Harriet the Spy. I am, of course, a fan of her bio of Jessica Mitford, but most impressed forever and always with her own, Leslie's memoir, Red Star Sister. When not researching or writing, Leslie teaches at the University of Redlands. I instructed my friend Leslie to compose and share whatever she wanted. Thoughts on community, politics, art, women writers. So much do I trust and value her insights. Here's my friend Leslie Brody to get our evening started.
Thank you, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, my biography of Louise Fitzhugh was published in December of 2020. For me, one of the strangest parts of launching a book during COVID has been the lack of exchange with bookstores, and because of restrictions, that is. It was 3 months after publication before I'd see my physical book on a physical shelf. I understand that is not the worst disappointment one might suffer during a plague year, and illustrates that I have had a relatively fortunate time of it. When the pandemic struck, I already had a completed book in its revision and editing phase, which meant COVID gave me license to ensconce myself in the life of the mind and to neglect the practical domestic matters to which I previously attended by force of habit. Although friends and family were infected with coronavirus, no one in our immediate family died, and the only one who was critically ill did survive. As a professor, I could work from home, and as both of us are writers, my husband and I are used to a lot of solitude. That said, it was still a wretched, miserable, dastardly year. I found it almost impossible to sleep through the night. There were 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 deaths and more, 10 hospitals, overflowing morgues. We were locked down in San Bernardino County through the typical British summer and nightmarishly hot autumn, as wildfires frequently erupted in our vicinity. One had been foolishly started by some kind of smoke-emitting device at a gender reveal party. Equally weird and equally foolish was the cohort of fellow citizens who denied that the coronavirus was dangerous and who refused, despite the evidence, to wear masks. At some point, I realized this just wasn't a world I cared to rejoin. Every day I'd read in the multiple papers and newsletters to which I subscribed that infections were rising, hospitals full. There was no reliable treatment, ventilators were in short supply, deaths seemed random, and so many people continued to deny reality. Throughout the election and for months, and after January 6th, my husband and I existed mostly in a state of high dudgeon from which it has been unexpectedly difficult to climb down. Combating our aroused anger, the expression coined to characterize a fixation on Trump's ugliness, we spent our quarantine lives in close scrutiny of our sweet, sensitive dog Flora, who disdains baby carriages and bicycles, and our cat Hasha, who has been a model of self-reliance and confidence. I observed, in contrast to these creatures, how shaky and uncertain are my own human customs and habits. As one winter surge in infections followed another, my doubts about rejoining human society increased. I was struggling with just such pervasive negativism when Andrew first reached out to invite me here to speak. I didn't want to do it. And yet, as it was Andrew Tonkovich, whose life-affirming benevolence many of us mortals here have felt, I began to think that to be with other writers might not be the worst way to spend an evening, and that somehow to keep myself within the light that Andrew and Lisa radiate would be a salvaging measure. Around the same time, unbeknownst to me, forces underneath my backyard were working to tempt me back from my feral isolation. Some bulbs I had planted years ago, which had never previously blossomed, had been dividing and multiplying and doing whatever flowers do when left to their own devices in soil and sunshine. So that suddenly 1, then 5, 15, 25 purple irises sprang up, and my little desert garden became a field of quintessentially purple, poetically fragrant, and irresistibly persuasive flowers. Then came the vaccine. And then I started feeling goofily ambitious, anticipating the day when I might actually get to sign copies of my book for an audience of readers in an independent bookstore. And that's the modest milestone I wish for each one of us writers here today. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. The Santa Monica Review has been a lantern in a dark wood. I'm pleased to be in the presence of such gifted writers as Lindsay, Tim, Jenny, Leland, and Laura. It is an honor to be ensnared in this mortal coil with all of you. Thank you. And our first reader is Tim McAdams.
Thank you, Leslie Brody. Hi, I'm T.S. McAdams. I'm going to read a little bit less than half of my story in the new issue. If you like it, I also have new work coming out next month in Sierra Nevada Review and then in Madcap Review in July. The story I'm reading from today is called Scenes of Winter in the Desert. He's a day early is why Taylor looks at him like that. It doesn't mean anything. The only reason Sean doesn't bring up yesterday is because you don't confess things that don't bother you. He remembers every detail, but it's hard to tell already whether he's remembering or remembering. He remembers blood, but it's not like seeing it again. The hilltop smelled like dust, even in the snow, frozen dust, but he doesn't smell it again. He doesn't feel his palms on the handle of the shovel or hear the man's ineffectual last sounds. You expect sensory memories, flashbacks, but it's not like that. It was self-defense. He tells her about this morning. She can see his swollen face, and she watched him unload the car, so she knows about his ribs too. He feels good about this morning. Most people never endure a real beating, but he and Wayne did. They didn't have to. He and Wayne started it. Wayne did, and Sean joined in. That's a bond they'll always have. Taylor says it was pointless and stupid, and that's what a wife should say. She's dressed for staying in, sweats and a t-shirt. Maybe she brushed her hair. Taylor's hair is somewhere between light brown and blonde, more blonde when she's been to the hairdresser. She may also cover some gray, or she may not have any. They've been married 22 years. She had Chinese takeout last night, and there's still a carton of fried rice. They heat 2 cans of soup to go with it. 1 lentil vegetable and 1 vegetable barley mixed together in 1 saucepan. It's early, and they're not that hungry, but dinner is something you do. They check it off. They put dishes in the dishwasher, but don't run it. It's not enough for a load. Taylor walks into the bedroom, and Sean trails behind. He touches her shoulder blade through cotton, just with his fingertips, just to see how that works out, and they end up having sex. the first time since he admitted his affair. It's strange to be naked against her, to flatten her breasts and pool their bellies, all without risking words or eye contact. Strange, but not terrible, and they hold hands afterwards. A person could get by on just that. Sean thought the camping trip meant things were back to normal. He and Wayne, his brother-in-law, go every 2 months, except in summer when it's too hot. Their spot isn't even a campground, just a hill on BLM land where you can pitch a tent and shoot pine cones and nobody cares. Sean takes his Ruger Vaquero, sort of an Old West 6-shooter with a modern tweak to the hammer so it won't go off if you drop it. Wayne brings a lot of guns. He says a felon's gun rights are restored after 10 years. Anyway, the Vaquero is legal. They had planned a trip in December, but that was when Taylor moved out over Sean's affair. He had the affair in September and October. Claudia de Jesus went on maternity leave, and the long-term sub caught Sean studying her chest in a department meeting. She came to his classroom after, and he said, "Look, I know," starting to apologize, but the sub, Audrey Boyd, had questions about the pacing plan. Sean worked in a joke about better living through great inflation. Audrey laughed and leaned over his desk. He thought about it all day, and then he and Taylor went to dinner with the Carrillos. Their son is Connor's roommate at Occidental. They were all celebrating getting their boys into college. Sean drove to the restaurant, and Taylor made unnecessary phone calls, like she does. He usually turns off the radio so she can ignore him better, but it was already low, so he left it. Taylor turned it all the way off with an irritated twist, and Sean decided to fuck Audrey Boyd. 5 times in 6 weeks, they went to motel rooms with views of auto dealerships, and Audrey wore lingerie with straining panels and complicated straps. Sean had orgasms and swabbed them away with thin, cynical washcloths. Audrey wasn't heartbroken when the guilt made him quit. A month later, still guilty, he confessed to Taylor, and she moved in with her mother in Mojave. She had to leave her mother's house at 5 a.m. to get to work, so Sean brought lunches to her middle school, blocks away from his high school, and Taylor came home for Christmas. In February, Wayne said he'd heard through the family grapevine that things were settled enough for them to go camping again. Sean planned a sick day Friday and stayed late Thursday doing prep. It didn't matter so much about the regular classes. They wouldn't do the assignment regardless. The honors class got one of his charts. What does each character think of Jay Gatsby? Find 2 quotes to support each claim. Write a warrant for each claim, a paragraph or more explaining how the quotes back it up. You can't always hit all the Common Core standards. If they want kids giving speeches, they should have a speech class. But Sean is big on textual evidence. He put detailed agendas on the dry erase board. In honors, at least, if that one sub started playing his banjo and telling stories about his life, Genesis Sanchez would say, "Mr. Patrick left work for us." He didn't spend much time straightening the classroom. Taylor knew where he was, but still. Sean locked the door from outside and waved to Ms. De Jesus, who was admiring the new penis art on the wall outside her room. She had named her baby Elena. The penis had an enormous shaft and a swollen mushroom head, but compact testicles, more like a double chin. Ms. De Jesus said, "You send your son to private school, don't you, Sean?" "We did," Sean said. "He graduated last year." He joined her in front of the penis. "Teachers aren't any better than us, but I think it's worth it." "I always said I wouldn't." Sean and Ms. De Jesus walked to the parking lot over cobbles of spit-out gum, trampled into flat black pebbles. Sean said, "Don't feel bad about it. You gave it the office." Sean folded down the seats and packed his Outback to the roof. Propane stove, 4-season tent, 120-quart igloo cooler, water, tactical duffel bag, tactical lantern, tactical pots and pans, camo pattern folding chair. He and Wayne both fall for all the tactical branded camping shit. Sean remembered the tactical shovel, serrated for beheading zombies, which he uses to dig poop holes. He went back inside to lock doors and feed Taylor's cockatiel. That took 5 minutes at the most, probably less. He hit the 405 before noon, narrowly beating Friday traffic, slipping through valley suburbs behind noise abatement walls and every kind of embankment tree, an international multi-ethnic college brochure of trees. I-5 skirted stagey hills, clumped with rainy green shrubs that would dry to brown chaparral, and the 14 past Santa Clarita winnowed the greens to a sturdy shade of olive. In Acton, sunny, dry hills neighbored hillsides spattered with snow. Things flattened out in the Antelope Valley, and snow backed off to the horizon. It drizzled a little. Sean read billboards for McDonald's, Chevrolet, DUI lawyers, technical schools, easy loans, and the San Manuel Casino. In Mojave, snowy hills came close again, and the 14 stopped being a freeway for a couple of miles. These days, Mojave feels like nothing but gas stations and a Denny's, but it still has 4,000 people. Taylor's mother was back there somewhere. Sean bought gas and firewood at Chevron, piling wood in the front passenger seat and floor space. He had to go inside to pay for the wood. Then the 14 swung east through another half hour of wind farms and Joshua trees and Red Rock Hills, and Sean watched for landmarks because the turnoff had no sign. The last 10 miles were why he traded his Camry for a Subaru, and even the Subaru lost a skid plate the last time out, but he always made it so far. This time there was snow on the hill, and he slid back down on his first try, but he did okay the second time with more momentum. He parked near the top, and tradition said it was time for a beer, but Sean wanted a fire first. He unloaded the wood and opened the hatchback to look for his lighter, and some guy jumped out with a gun. The guy must have tossed the igloo at some point, back in the valley or at the Mojave Chevron, and stowed away in its place, crouching with a tent and duffel bag across his back. Just from Mojave was more than an hour. No surprise the guy cramped up, scrambling over a tub of gear, and fell out of the car, twisting, landing hard on one shoulder. Sean stomped the wrist of his gun hand, feeling more silly than desperate, feeling like the survivalist cosplay finally got out of hand. And the guy reached for the gun with his left, so Sean chopped his neck with the shovel, like digging post holes, 3 or 4 times. It didn't behead the guy, but it killed him. It took a minute. Sean thought he might puke, so he walked beyond the boulders that kind of defined the camp, but nothing happened, so he walked back. The dead guy was blond with a long mustache that framed his chin. He had the bones for it, if you like that sort of thing. He wore a puffy blue down jacket, and he made that look cool too. Sean looked at the mangled neck, the mannequin face and hands, and he felt cold. It was cold. Starting a fire took forever in the wind. Wayne always brought a drum from a junked washing machine, and fires were easier in that. But Wayne couldn't get the day off. He's a grounds and props guy for a studio in Burbank, and he wasn't coming until Saturday. Sean didn't know the dead guy. Maybe Taylor knew something. Having Sean killed for his affair would show a lot of passion, at least. Maybe she had an affair with the dead guy, but Sean recoiled from that. He owned the double standard, not that he excused himself for the Audrey business either. Still, if it was a love triangle, Taylor didn't have to be in on the killing part. She could have had a revenge affair with a skeevy desert hipster and still prefer Sean. He had to bury the body in the little gully behind the hill. People dig up the hillside all the time to bury turds. The arroyo was full of snow, maybe with running water underneath. The ground was hard under a little loose sand, and he was digging past sunset. On the hilltop, you can stand on a boulder and see the highway, and it looks closer than it is. From the hillside or near the creek bed, there were only dark mountains and the occasional scrub pine reaching high enough to silhouette. And the moon, 3/4, ice-colored. He had read somewhere that the day side is hot, but it looked cold. There's no reception out there, so he couldn't Google it. It was best to be alone doing what he was doing, but hard to feel that way. He climbed to the fire a lot to warm his hands and started warming to a scenario where Taylor slept with the dead guy but didn't hate Sean, even still loved him, and didn't want him killed. He dug about 4 feet. 40 inches anyway. He felt the guy's pockets, and there was a wallet, keys, a phone, and a pocket knife, exactly what Sean had in his pockets. He left it all where it was. The gun was a 1911, and Sean field stripped it and buried the frame and slide in separate holes. People take kids out there. He dug up a couple of scraggly plants digging his hole, and he replanted them when he filled it in. He poured water on the grave, and that smoothed it down. If he had 50 gallons of water, there would be no trace of digging, but he only had 3. He did the best he could with 2 and kept a gallon to drink. Thanks to the dead asshole, there wasn't any beer. After that, he had to set up his tent. Finally, he sat by the fire with a bag of tortilla chips. The dead guy's ghost walked up the hill. Sean ate tortilla chips. The ghost said, "I did it for sex." Sean drank distilled water. The ghost said, "I shouldn't have showed Hector. It wasn't about that." The ghost had his hands in his puffy jacket pockets, and he wrapped his arms around his torso instead of zipping the jacket like a regular guy by a campfire. He said, "I was into her. I would have kept it going. All that other stuff is on Hector." Sean didn't know a Hector, and the fire wasn't all that warm, so he crawled into his tent. That's all for me for now. I hope you'll get your hands on the issue and read the rest. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone. Next up, Lindsay Ellis.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Andrew, for putting this together. It's so good to be here with you all. I have a piece in this issue called, oh, Lord, forgetting my piece. Sorry, it's Jazz and Other Words for Love. I'm not going to read from that. I'm actually going to read from my upcoming novel. It's called Bone Broth, and that's coming out June 1st. All you do is press down on the keys with your thumbs. Bev tapped the keypad with her shears, her sculpted nails brushing against Justine. As soon as Justine tried to peck the little buttons, letters from the alphabet flooded the search box. Random tabs popped open that she couldn't make disappear. No, heifer, like this. Bev dropped the shears in the sink and yanked the phone from Justine. She punched the pad with her thumbnails, her fingers expertly flitting across the screen. Okay. Justine snatched the phone back before Bev could see Rich's message. If she couldn't control who got a hold of her past, she figured the least she could do was still have some say over her current private life. Still can't believe how quiet you were at group yesterday, Bev said. Get off my back. I went, didn't I? Yeah, but the whole point is to talk. There's a reason we meet, you know. Well, you talked enough for both of us, Justine reminded her. Bev passed on her check-in speech just like Justine did. But for what she held inside during the group wellness discussion, she plenty made up for it afterward during their drive home. Talking up the good food Justine missed out on and warning her how she'd end up like Myrtle if she kept refusing to be social with folks. By the time they pulled into Justine's driveway, she was ready to call it quits on their friendship, if just for a little while. Justine went back into the house with a dark cloud over her. Everything felt wrong, so she ended up doing what she did when she got that down. She read her Bible and smoked a joint, flipped right to some of her favorite passages in Psalms, and rolled up what little she found in Bev's glove compartment when they'd stopped to get gas. Then Justine listened to some Bill Withers while she took a bath and played dress up in clothes she hadn't worn in years. Decades, stuff she couldn't believe still fit, with smells and textures that hurled old memories at her until she was nothing but a weak, teary mess on her bedroom floor. Justine realized that nothing she'd stolen from funerals, flowers, jewelry, handkerchiefs, could compare with what she rehashed that night. Crucial moments that she tried to bury inside of herself or replace completely with other people's crucial moments came back full force with a vengeance. Just thinking about it put her on the verge of imploding. Cut it all off, Justine told Bev. She stared at her best friend through the mirror. Bev put her hand on her hip. Do what? You heard me. Why? Just do it. The shower head's drip seemed like it was getting louder. Muttering to herself, Bev disappeared and returned with a large towel. Thought you just wanted a Quick, easy trim, she said. She hurled the cloth on the floor around Justine's feet. Took me 6 years to get your hair this long and healthy. Now you want to go do something stupid. You sound scared, Justine said. Bev knelt in front of her on the closed toilet, her slender palms hugging Justine's knees. Justine, I know these past few months have been rough for you. I mean, hair is just hair, but still. Her voice trailed off and her gaze too. Justine got the feeling she was being refused, bargained with. When Wesley died, she said to Bev, all the neighbors came by, and they weren't just coming by to offer their condolences. The last thing I wanted was to be smothered in pity, but I found most of them just wanted to meddle, to see all what they thought Wesley left me so they could try and take it. I wanted to tell them so bad, not a damn thing, but it was none of their business, so I didn't open my door for days. Not to you, not to the kids, not to anyone. No one belonged in this house but me and God. We were the only two I could handle or trust, or it was Justine's turn to trail off. She started thinking about things that had nothing to do with Wesley's death, like her kids who'd taken pains to better understand the person she was before any of them were alive or thought of. And what the hell for? To dig at the root of what they saw as their father's ugliness, or worse, Justine's obedience? To get why she left her old life behind, never to speak of it again, to make things peaceful for their nosy, ungrateful behinds? Justine remembered Ma once telling her the way a person treated their parents came back around to them. They'd had their differences, but Justine didn't recall giving her mother this much grief, outside of the endless worrying during Justine's little stint. Things had happened so fast. Pruitt-Igoe's demolition in the spring of '72, the displacement of her family and closest friends. At the time, Ma was a wife, a full-time mother, and had spent nearly 2 decades working in produce at the same grocer. And she was made to leave the housing project she called home before it was destroyed, with only a suitcase and the urn filled with Pop's ashes. There was no way she and Justine could or cared to talk about it openly, even when Ma was finally given a new place to live, only 2 years before she died. What were they supposed to say to each other? Gee, remember when that happened? Justine couldn't let it go, not in the way Ma wanted her to. Ma dealt with it her way, as did Wesley and Bev. Justine dealt with it differently. She did what she thought was right at the time. Months after Pruitt-Igoe was destroyed, she joined others in the crusade to unmask and ultimately dethrone the veiled prophet for the sake of winning back the dignity and basic rights of herself and the people she loved. In that moment, she finally recognized how her part in the scheme, as small as it seemed, recovered so much humanity. But the plan backfired. They lost. Case closed. When Wesley saw Justine in the newspaper after the scheme, he beat her for a week straight, 7 days. Up until then, he had never laid a finger on her, although they constantly argued. After feeling his wrath for so long, it was a wonder Justine still had all of her teeth. She remembered the sharp taste of blood in her mouth and how she willed herself not to cry out anymore after that first night, out of fear of waking Raina, who as a toddler at the time was still adjusting to a regular sleep pattern. So Justine vowed to give up her days as an undercover freedom fighter. No more secret meetings with the group she forged a strong bond with while Wesley was away at work or tending to one of his affairs. No more nothing. In a week's time, Justine had let a man she loved more than life itself knock the will out of her. She dimmed her own spirit, and she learned to like it. Thinking back, Justine couldn't believe she'd stuck around and allowed Wesley to change the course of her path. But it happened. And while Raina had taken it upon herself to throw everything back up in her face, now was outrageously ignorant. Folks love to pick at the untold, simply because it was untold. Everyone always wanted to know why, but sometimes there was no why. There was just the things people did or didn't do. Please, Bev, Justine said aloud, don't be one of those meddling folks. Do me this favor just once, simply because I asked. I just want the ends gone, the relaxed part. My roots can stay. Small puddles formed in Bev's eyes. She squeezed Justine's kneecaps. Then give me the damn scissors. I'll do it myself. The shears wound up in Justine's hands and then in her hair. Bev snatched them from her and began snipping until shiny black strands fell around Justine like black feathers. Justine looked at nothing as one hand gripped the other in her lap. When Bev was done, she rose before her legs could freeze and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her mind flashed unwanted snippets of a young woman with her memories of televised blasts, turning vacated buildings, once her home, into mountains of gray powder on that fateful day in April '72. She saw the young woman on that cold December day of the same year in the Sears uniform she borrowed, hot and red and mad and wanting room to spread. She was there, as instructed by her comrades, to keep tabs in the dressing room behind the Kiel Auditorium while she mended the gowns of those debutantes, all hoping to be crowned and dance with a hooded figure, the veiled one. In the mirror, Bev stood behind Justine and sucked her teeth, hands on her hips. A mess of short, tough, uneven black hair sat like a halo around Justine's face. There she was, or the person she was once becoming. Thank you. And the next reader is Jenny Shank.
Thank you, Lindsay. I look forward to reading your book when it comes out this summer. I just found out a few weeks ago that my short story collection that's called Mixed Company won the George Garrett Fiction Prize, and it'll be published by Texas Review Press in October. And 2 of the stories in it were published by the Santa Monica Review. So I really want to thank Andrew for that, encouraging me along the way. I'm going to read a story that appears in the new issue called The Sit-In. And when I was writing this story, I was thinking about how news events were happening for the past few years so quickly that it seemed like if you paused on any given day and you wrote a story about it, the next day the story would be historical fiction because events had moved on. So I paused on a particular day in 2017 and wrote a story about it, and it's fiction, even though the character has the same name as my first name as me. There's just a lot of Jennies. I thought it was realistic. So here we go. Here's the beginning of my story, The Sit-In. It was the summer of 2017. The country had gone mad, and Jen Novotny derived all her intel about its decline and dim hopes for salvation from a Twitter user called Saber7, who claimed to be a former special ops agent and posted under the profile picture of a gecko. He told his followers to have faith in the eagle of justice. Bobby Three Sticks was on the job. The FinCEN case looked tight. Sig Int on all the treason weasels abounded, and the menace would soon be stopped. Whenever some new indignity agitated Saber7's followers, he urged them to stay frosty. Saber7 was probably a hoax, but although the year was only half over, it had been a long one, and Jen needed to believe in something again. It might as well be a fucking gecko. Jen's husband said she was getting worked up with the same kind of conspiracy theories she deplored on the other side. One Saturday in June, Jen stirred mac and cheese with a wooden spoon while she thumbed through Facebook on her phone. In secret groups, women plotted their rallies, but on their public pages, they clicked the like button on Red State Cousins' baby photos. A notification popped up on Jen's screen. Sit in for healthcare. People were planning to occupy Senator Gardner's 8 Colorado offices to protest the healthcare bill. Jen wanted to go, but she'd have to ask Devin first. "That's rotting your brain," Devin said, startling Jen. He appeared out of nowhere, like a ninja. "My brain is already rotted," Jen said. "Between budget headaches at work, running their tween daughters, Clementine and Abigail, to school, dance, and the orthodontist, endless meetings about their 9-year-old son Freddie's IEP plan and his appointments with various tutors, doctors, and occupational therapists, she needed an outlet for her rage. As Jen stirred, an ad appeared on her phone for the pencil casers her daughters had asked for in the shape of smiling, soft-serve poop emoji. Truly, it was a marvel. They were selling these poo cases at regular stores, Next to the fidget Wutsits, the kids were spinning between their fingers nonstop because they could not take the anxiety. Jen remembered a time when to buy anything resembling feces, you had to go to that special joke store in the mall. Now, blank-eyed, smiling poo was everywhere. It was the symbol of their times. Prince was dead, and Bowie too. Fires raged across Western lands. The coral reefs were skeletized. The oceans lapped ever further into the coasts. Evil robots had actually overtaken the nation, just like in the wackiest 1950s sci-fi movies. But the robots remained inside the computers, disguised as hot Russian MAGA chicks, so more than half the populace remained unalarmed. Hadn't anyone ever seen 2001? "You're fuming about it again," Devin observed. The macaroni began to smoke. Jen looked up and held out the spoon, covered in artificial cheese. "I have a prop." Its febrile tangerine color reminded her of the whole situation. "I'm in the resistance," she said. "I've got to keep informed." Devin shook his head and smiled softly, sadly. "We don't have enough money in the health savings account for you to see a shrink too." Of course not. Every penny they could spare had to go towards helping their son. "Maybe you could take 5 minutes and do one of those mindfulness podcasts," Devin suggested. When Freddie was diagnosed with an array of conditions they'd never heard of, Devin turned to yoga and meditation. He practically levitated as he walked around, betraying no emotion. But Jen believed kids needed emotion, even if it got them stirred up before bedtime. They had to know what mattered. She knew what she looked like to Devin, to the world. A slightly overweight, middle-aged mom with a streak of gray near her right temple, not as any kind of a statement, but because she only managed to dye her hair twice a year. She didn't look romantic and young like someone in an actual resistance, wearing a beret, gauloise dangling from her lips, her scarf blowing back in the wind of her righteousness. "I'm not crazy," she said, scraping at the macaroni stuck to the bottom of the pan. "The world is." Devin took the spoon from her and divided the salvageable macaroni between the 3 bowls. "What's the goal? You remove one, you'll get the next one. We got enough problems here at home." By problems, he meant Freddie. And he was right. At best, it would be a 4-year grind if none of the frequent pissing contests with nuke-equipped dictators ended in the big kaboom before then. Still, Jen didn't like to concede Devin's point. She didn't like to concede anything these days. "We need the health insurance these bastards are trying to take away." "Bastards!" Freddie echoed from down the hall. His bat ears detected any profanity uttered in his vicinity. Like playing with a new toy, he'd repeat the word for days, at home, at school, in the yard. Devin shook his head once and made the calm down gesture with his hands. His serenity infuriated Jen. She continued in a whisper, "Without health insurance, we're finished." Jen was the family's minister of finance. She calculated everything on the basis of Freddie's $150 an hour therapy sessions. Taking the family to a movie would cost them half a session. 75 boxes of macaroni equaled 1 session. "We have insurance," Devin said, putting the sink into the pan. "For now." Jen picked a brown noodle out of one bowl. If Freddie saw it, he wouldn't eat a bite. "They're talking about reinstating lifetime limits and Medicaid. What if Freddie needs it someday when we can't take care of him?" "You're catastrophizing," Devin said. Freddie, Mr. Pre-existing Condition himself, walked in. "Something smells bad," he said. Freddie's copper gold hair was eye-catching enough to draw strangers in to comment, who then quickly retreated after talking to him. His light eyelashes and freckled skin gave him an elfin look until he was about 7, when he grew stocky and strong, nobody's sprite. "What do you mean?" Jen said, forcing a smile. She opened a window to let in some air. She spent half her life cooking Freddie's odd, specific food and the other half convincing him not to reject it. Freddie bent his head low to the bowl and sniffed. "I'm not eating this," he stood, adding, "Bastards," before he went back to his iPad. When she tried to imagine Freddie grown up selecting a meal at college at a college dining hall or office cafeteria, she couldn't. She had no idea if he'd ever leave them, or if he'd be like that man with Down syndrome she saw walking in the evenings with his 90-year-old father, a skin and bone specter who somehow determined not to die. You didn't get to rest until the future seemed secure for your kids. And right now, the calendar with the future on it bore a giant smiling poop emoji. While Clementine and Abigail ate, Jen went online to learn more about the sit-in. She had to make Devin understand its importance. That night in bed, Jen whispered to Devin, "A bunch of people are planning sit-ins at Senator Gardner's office this week to protest the healthcare bill. I want to go with them." Peaceful sit-ins? Of course. On Saturday? Sure, I can watch the kids while you do that. No, Jen said, the offices aren't open on the weekends. It has to be during the week. But we need those paid time off days. As a lesser breadwinner, Jen used most of her vacation days for Freddie to go to his appointments and watch him on bad days. This is important. If the bill passes, we'll have worse problems than no vacation. For someone who catastrophizes constantly, Devin said, you're surprisingly optimistic about your ability to influence a senator. Jen's neck muscles tightened a notch. Can you get the kids after camp on Tuesday? Devin shook his head. I have a presentation, a meeting. Thanks. You'll juggle. The idea is to attract publicity about what's in this healthcare bill. They're releasing it in less than a week before they vote. We need to shame them. You'd be good at that, Devin said, and flipped over on his pillow and switched off his reading lamp. Decades ago, Jen had been an A student, praised by teachers and parents, her school portraits framed in gold, draped with ribbons she'd won. Devin used to tell her how irresistible she was. Now the only feedback she got was negative. You're damn right I would, Jen said, daring to raise her voice to a normal speaking volume. Freddie screamed from his bedroom across the hall. You woke me up, bastards! Devin let out air like he was deflating. Jen grabbed a bottle of chamomile lavender spray and went to appease Freddie. She had never been more essential and less appreciated. What if she died? You'd have to hire 5 workers to replace what she did for this family. If you zapped all these ordinary mothers out of the world, everything that they kept in motion would collide and burst into flames. In fact, the country was beginning to resemble what happened when moms were not in charge. Before Jen left for the sit-in Tuesday morning, Freddie couldn't find the only shoes he'd agreed to wear to camp, so she rushed to arrive for the opening of the Fort Collins office near where she lived. She sped a little, wanting to make the most of the day she'd taken off work. She wove through traffic and parked in the strip mall lot she was surprised to find empty. Where was everybody? Maybe they'd carpooled. Stay frosty, she told herself as she opened the door to the office building between a Kumon and a SoulCycle. The brass nameplate glinted in the light of a window at the end of the hall, Senator Gardner's office. Over the past year, she'd called this man more often than she'd ever called a boyfriend, relative, or friend. She talked his voicemail and occasionally one of his staffers. She always began her call, "Hello, I'm a constituent," because he told a reporter that most of the people who contacted him were paid protesters from New York and California. He'd ignored her requests as assiduously as if he bore her a personal grudge. Fear fluttered in her stomach. So far, most of her activism had been virtual, but for Freddie's sake, she needed to be brave and support the others protesting in person. The windowless reception area was empty. An unoccupied desk stood next to a door to another room. A phone with lights blinking red and white sat unanswered. 2 worn office chairs hugged the wall under a glossy photograph of Pikes Peak. Had she gotten the date wrong? The door to the back room opened, and a young man emerged, blowing on a styrofoam cup of coffee. Slim and thin-necked, his dark hair had an unctuous sheen, like he was part weasel, and his skin was so pale he might have lived in a terrarium. "Oh, hello," he said, sounding startled by her presence. "May I help you?" "I'd like to speak to Senator Gardner, please," she said. "I'm a constituent. It's about the healthcare bill." Senator Gardner isn't in, ma'am. Is he ever in? She'd grown to loathe the smug, silver-haired gerbil of a man who'd narrowly won election a few years earlier. Comparing humans to animals is part of how we got in this mess, Devin would say sagely, citing historical animal examples. Don't call a senator a gerbil. Senator Gardner visits from time to time, the young man said. Are there other constituents back there? She asked. Of course, they must already be assembled in a conference room. He raised his eyebrows, puzzled. No, ma'am, you're the first today. Jen sank into a chair and checked Facebook. Digging back through the comments, it appeared that sometime between when she started Freddie's occupational therapy exercises the night before and that morning's shoe incident, the plan had changed. Instead of simultaneously occupying the senator's 8 Colorado offices, they decided to converge on the Denver office. So I'll leave you to read the rest of the story about Jen's single woman sit-in in the issue. And our next reader is Leland.
Thanks, Jenny. That was hilarious. And thanks to all the readers that have gone thus far. Leslie, T.S., Lindsay, all great readings as well. Hey, honored to be here. Thanks, Andrew, for inviting me. And I've long admired the Santa Monica Review and have never thought that I had a story good enough to submit. It's been a while since I submitted to it. So I'm honored to be in the issue. And I'm going to be reading from a story named Sitter Source, which is also hopefully speaks to our times. I will start now. My partner and I were never going to have kids of our own, so we decided to sign up for Sitter Source, the child care sharing app. We were pleasantly surprised to see so many well-off parents were willing to let us be with their children for hours and hours and sometimes days and weeks on end, while they jetted off on a moment's notice to vacations on boats, vineyards, and resort islands. Sitter Source didn't pay well. By the time we signed up, the service was already flooded with sitters, and everyone had 5 stars, so the oversupply drove down our pay. We got about $2 an hour, and parents rarely bothered to tip. But after all the heartbreak of my ovulation problems and the IVF that left us nearly penniless, sitting was well worth it. The parents never ceased to be surprised by the sight of us, my Chineseness, my partner's whiteness. For some reason, they seemed to always assume we'd be darker, West Indian or Filipino. The strange name my parents gave me could have originated from any number of nations, and the dim headshots on our app profiles were snapped on a smartphone from the previous decade. The parents in this sitting, who like us shall remain nameless for our respective privacies, were 4.89 stars. They lived in the Tony Heights, a neighborhood where the homes were in fact by the river at sea level. They identified as vax positive, so we left our PPE in the car. After the parents' initial surprise that we weren't from some war-torn sub-equatorial nation, they gave us the schedule for the weekend. Soccer and basketball games on Saturday, 2 birthday parties on Sunday, bedtime at 8 p.m. The children were 8, 5, 4, and 2. The 8 and the 4-year-olds were girls. We were provided the parents' contact information and encouraged to text, not call, if there were any issues. They didn't mention where they were going. The husband reminded his wife not to forget the masks before they left. The kids watched television, the screen of which took up an entire wall, in a family room that was the size of our apartment. The children were perfectly American, slim, blonde, blue-eyed, and after my partner turned on the phone app that jammed any potential home listening devices, we introduced ourselves. We're from Sitter Source, I said with a smile. Sitter Source, droned the 8-year-old. We got that all the time. What are you watching? Asked my partner. None of them responded. It was one of the Toy Story movies. The 5-year-old screamed, I'm tired of Sitter Source. Even when mom and dad are here, they don't want to be here, remember? Said the 8-year-old. The first few hours can be quite chilly, according to Sitter Source training. They recommended that you ask the kids what they want and provide it to them post-haste under the web module header Trust Accrual. But we never followed the training suggestions. What if, for instance, the kids wanted ice cream and it was near their bedtime? We had developed our own sitting style. This movie is so boring, am I right? I said. Silence. I nudged my partner, who echoed, yeah, too boring. Want to see a real movie? I asked. Slow blinks, mouths agape. I logged off of their streaming service and onto our own and then toggled to A Clockwork Orange. A classic, I said with a hushed voice. Eyes rounded, they absorbed the ultra-violence. Predictably, afterward, the 8-year-old gushed, "Wow, you two are so cool." The other 3 wept tears of fear and trauma, which hurt my heart a little, but sometimes happens. We chose this tack so they would learn from us what they would likely never learn from their affluent parents, that the world was a harsh, cruel place, and they had to lean on their devotion to each other to survive. The 5 and the 4-year-old asked us to hold them until they fell asleep with the lights on. The 2-year-old wet himself, so my partner changed him and put him to bed. I rocked the 5-year-old in my arms and petted his downy hair and felt his tiny bones against me and imagined that he was my own. A sated feeling rose in my chest. He smelled like cereal milk. I thought of the hundreds of kids I'd held close and comforted since I became a sitter. They comforted me. I hated that they felt their parents didn't care about them. Every child deserved parental love, naturally. Thank goodness for a service like SitterSource, so these poor rich kids could get love from me that they couldn't get from their rich parents. Parents always say that having a kid is like having a second heart outside yourself, and the love of your own children is so deep and intense it resists description. Parental condescension to non-parents has always made me angry and envious. Now that I'm a sitter, I wanted to tell parents that taking care of so many kids whose parents take their love for granted is like having hundreds and thousands of hearts outside yourself, and parents cannot comprehend the sheer volume and variegation of love that one experiences as a sitter. I wanted to say this loud and proud at the end of every sitting, but I never do because we must maintain our near 5-star average rating. After the kids were asleep, my partner and I raided the refrigerator for food the family wouldn't miss: grapes, crackers, and the like. Our stomachs growled. When we weren't sitting, my partner and I did several other sharing economy jobs, such as takeout delivery and rideshare driving, but our ends never seemed to meet. Most kids we've handled in a sitting, my partner pointed out, they seem manageable. $65 after taxes, he said, shaking his head, for 3 days to take care of 4 kids? Christ. Shh, they might hear you. These people think they can have as many kids as they want because they assume the future is going to be great for them, he whispered. The mother is still young. I bet they pop 2 or 3 more. My partner and I flopped onto the very comfortable and likely very expensive used sectional couch with button tufting and piped seat cushions and an ample number of plushback pillows. We snacked and held hands and watched The Shining. Content that we were providing a necessary service, the service was providing us emotional, if not literal, sustenance that we could otherwise never attain, all the while tasting, just for a few days, a luxurious existence totally free from economic worry. My partner didn't want children. He didn't dislike them. He was fine with my child questing. He said he didn't want to lose me. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect partner to do my injections, to attend my every fertility appointment on time, to hold me when I failed. But often I silently questioned him. Why me? I wasn't anything special. I'd always considered myself plain in every way. I offered him no economic security and served no greater purpose in society. We've been together for over a decade, and he seemed completely content with our partnership. He rarely asked me for anything, not even sex. I'd long suspected that his deepest desire was stasis, a non-confrontational peace. And if my suspicions were true, I found his lack of questing to be a form of laziness. And yet it was precisely his sublimity that I found attractive when we met on that dating app that has since pivoted to primarily serving seniors. Back then, I was looking for someone who flowed with my wants, a sidekick, a Thelma to my Louise. I especially appreciated his agreeableness as our economic stressors steadily increased as we lost our full-time jobs as office managers, back when there were still lots of offices. Our political views had converged over time as well, giving us common ground to which we returned daily. But lately, I felt like I was dragging him like luggage, his passivity a weight. Last week, I'd very nearly emailed SitterSource support to ask that they decouple our rating, which was a merely respectable 4.87. I suspected my individual rating would be far closer to a solid 5. Once you do the A Clockwork Orange followed by cuddle and comfort routine, the kids are usually devoted to you for the rest of the sitting. In the morning, we unpack the kids' breakfast containers and were horrified by the contents. beige purple purees topped with unidentifiable, uncooked vegetation. We should take them to a real American breakfast, I suggested. My partner gave me a warning look. Look, we'll keep it affordable, I told him. When we asked the kids, they were surprisingly dubious. What if it takes hours off our life expectancy? The 8-year-old asked. Is that what your parents teach you? I said. Of course, she said. We don't go to school. She said the word like it was dirty. Well, do you want to live long anyway? My partner asked. The planet is burning and flooding. It's only going to get worse. That's why your parents are on vacation all the time. They want to enjoy Earth while it's still habitable. Have you thought about that? The kids were quiet. Remember not to tell your parents what we talked about, I asked. Keep it inside. But in life, you'll want to learn from lots of different people and not just one or two. I've always wanted to go to IHOP, the 8-year-old said. The 5-year-old ate too many pancakes and my partner rushed him to the restroom to puke. He's going to feel much lighter, so much lighter when he comes back, I told his siblings from behind my face shield, medical mask, and goggles. This is so delicious, said the 8-year-old, palming her now distended abdomen, but I feel kind of awful. Maybe my parents are right. They're not wrong, I said, but you just experienced the deliciousness you would not have otherwise experienced. You satisfied your curiosity, and that's an essential part of living. The 8-year-old smiled. I like you. You're not like the other pterosaurs, even though you have to wear all those things over your face when you're outside. You're very lucky, I said. Not everyone can afford the shots that keep you safe from diseases. I know, she says. My mom says life's not fair, but it's not my fault. Thank you. And our next reader is the great Laura Glenn Louie.
Hi. Leland, I'm still recovering from a Clockwork Orange. Shoo. Okay, I'm going to read from Two Men, Lion and Baby. I welcome you all, and I thank Joy behind in the back room and Andrew for having all of us to this fine evening. Two Men, Lion, Baby. Lun emerged from the tunnel to a blinding light, window down, his arm browning in a heat he felt as an insistence at the front of his eyeballs, the back of his throat. The 2-lane bore, crowned by a deco facade of cast concrete, opened out to a sky brighter than what he left behind west of the ridge. Here on the backside was an expansive suburb, which to Lun was an enviable address. A 4x4 cut him off, and in braking, he saw the old man. He was squinting along the side of the highway, hatless in this cooker of an afternoon, suit, jacket, button-down shirt, narrow tie, now all a bit loose. The man stumbled and righted himself. Lun changed lanes and eased onto the shoulder. Where was the man's car? Where was his people? The old man was poised at the edge of the highway. Honk and whiz. He backed up, shuffled away. Lun turned off his engine and ran after him. Up close, the man was imposing. His stoop had masked a height and a density. He probably outweighed Lun by some 50, 60 pounds. Harold? Lun. I am Lun. The man kept on. Lun thought about leaving, but he had pulled over, gotten out of his car, spoken to the man. To go now would be to abandon him. Lun lengthened his stride, and the two walked long enough for one to temper the pace of the other. The old man seemed bent on a mission that led straight to the tunnel. At the last minute, Lun angled in front of him, turned him around. Cars shot out from the dark as 2-ton bullets. Lun had seen this before. Same freeway, a bow-legged, branchy woman in a red windbreaker. Could have been his auntie, someone's auntie. It was so unsettling to see anyone walking along the freeway. He wasn't sure he hadn't imagined her. When he turned and glanced at the rear view, she was gone. The man's lips were cracked. Lun's own throat tickled. How long had he been wandering around? The man was clutching a plastic bag, pills, what looked like candy bars, a toothbrush, comb. They passed Lun's car. Up ahead on the bank was a live oak offering shade, where Lun had vague notions of persuading the man to rest. The oak was good size, but Lund wished for a banyan with aerial roots plenty sturdy for a bench. He wished he had the commuter van. There was a radio in it. Jeannie, the dispatcher, could piggyback a call to highway patrol. Wait here, sir, I'll be right back. Lund retrieved from the trunk the plaid suitcase he used for laundry. The old man was back at the edge of the road. Go on, sir. Look, please, have a seat. The old man looked up. Harold? Lund, I am Lund. He upended the suitcase, set it down in the shade of the tree. The old man may have forgotten a lot, but he knew this was no chair. Lund led him by the elbow, humbled by the man's solidity. In a fall, he would be little help. A truck destined for the junkyard coasted onto the shoulder down the road. A man and a woman got out like Sunday. They unloaded bags of garbage, mangled toys, a chewed-up sofa with stains that could be dog or someone's granny. A woman in a Volvo wagged her finger. The man returned the salute, as if thinking to put a fork in her road. Mattresses, refrigerators, drums from washing machines, a swing set, skunks, foxes, a 7-point buck, torn leg, dark smear, slow death. In the several 100,000 miles he had driven, Lund had seen just about everything on the shoulder. Once, coming off a deserted exit near Albany, he saw a baby thrown out the window into the pampas grass. He thought it was a baby, newborn, wrapped in a blanket. He braked and was working up his nerve to check because what if it was a baby? When the driver threw his car in reverse. A girl too young to drive rushed out, grabbed the bundle to her breast, and barely managed to get back in the car before the driver took off. The heat smarted his eyes. Some tea, sir? Even on a hot day, Lund traveled with the thermos, chrysanthemum. The old man set his bag down, picked it up again. Hot, Lund squatted. He blew his tea. The old man blew his tea. Lund considered his options. A pickup passed. Undocumented workers stood in the flatbed, hanging onto a pipe frame, garden tools at their feet. Lund made out a machete in the pile and caught the bright eyes of a laborer. ESL, the great arbiter. Last month, there was a rhinoceros on the highway in Louisiana. Lund was sorry he had spoken. The rhinoceros had come to a bad end. Tea trickled down the old guy's chin. He needed a shave. I saw a lion once on the freeway near the zoo. The old man blinked crusty eyes. Did he understand anything Lund was saying? He wished he had something to offer him to wash his eyes. He jumped over the fence of the zoo and was right there on the gravel at the bottom of the hill. I pulled over behind this van. Soccer girls crazy excited. The mom starts to make a movie. The lion's pacing. The mom's making a movie. The old man turned to Lund. I called the dispatcher. Jeannie, I said, call the zoo. Tell them to send someone quick before the children get hurt. The lion's pacing, 400-pound easy. The mom shooting away. Here come these boys leaning out their windows, honking their horn, yelling at the lion. You do not yell at lions. Lund pointed as if the lion was down the road. One of the boys opens his door and I quick crank down my window. Even the soccer mom is saying something. Cars backing up, not so straight. The boys whistle and hoot, one leg's dangling out, and bam! You never saw anything so big, move so fast, all 4 paws off the ground, belly loose and flopping. Those boys beat it quick. Lund slapped his thigh. I thought my heart was going to explode. The old man spat. His shoes needed resoling. I tell you, we are not made the same way lions are. The old man stared across the freeway. There's a zoo near the golf course. His voice had real resonance. Lund waited. He learned patience. Sometimes the whole vanload of people never said a word except to thank him when they got out. If they didn't tip, he never saw the color of their eyes. Lion cubs born at the zoo. My Crystal got to hold one, had her picture in the Tribune. She was 4. The old man tried to set his cup down on a table that wasn't there. Len caught it. The man got out a yellowed news clipping from his wallet. Len looked over his shoulder. Maybe the same lion. Crystal is nearly 40. Who can live that long in captivity? A child and a cub, cheek to cheek, huge paws, spots, very cute. Still, his daughter was holding a predator. The old man refilled the clipping and put it back in his wallet. ID, some 10s, some 1s. Mark. His name was Mark, or Mr. Mark. Len had a sudden craving for CL Guy. He wondered if Mr. Mark ate chicken. What do you suppose the lion was thinking, all those cars rushing by? Free, scared. He wanted to go home. Len sipped his tea. The old man sipped his tea. A caravan of U.S. Army jeeps crept along the right lane with the speed of the unvanquished. They shot the rhinoceros, the old man offered. The one in Louisiana, you saw his picture in the paper? Midge said, Who's Midge? My wife is coming. Here? She's coming for you? Mr. Mark stared off again. Len was going to go home and write to his mother, put forth his most persuasive argument for her immigration. 2 Chinatowns. He had room. He'd make room. Mr. Mark, how did you get here? Crystal's baby, all born on the same day. Courtney, Christine, Courtney, Christine, and another girl. Beautiful beauties. I was doing fine on my own, but Crystal insisted. Now she's sorry. She's tired. 3 babies is too many. Spittle formed at the corners of his mouth. Midge is coming. Where is home, Mr. Mark? Orinda, Lafayette? Does his daughter know where he is? Harold? I'm Lun. How did you get here? But I drove. From China? Lun laughed. The old man laughed. To tell the truth, Mr. Mark, from China, I swam. Sumjun, deep bay. Sumjun is a pond compared to San Francisco Bay, but from mainland to Hong Kong on a moonless night, swimming the 4 kilometers seemed like a biblical feat. Lun was not a strong swimmer. He was no swimmer at all, but he was young and he could see Hong Kong from where he stood. 100 yards out, his lungs were on fire. His mother begged him to stay. Already he regretted not saying goodbye. He lost his bearings, confused one beacon for another, headed out to sea, swam in circles, hours in the water, the thirst. Lun slapped himself, prayed to the water goddess, dozed, choked. Then Hong Kong so close he could almost taste autonomy. The shore messed with him, reaching out and retracting with the tides. A reef, a toehold, a price. Oysters wedged in their bed razored his macerated skin. He crawled and collapsed on the beach, cut, cramping in muscles he never knew he had. Cried. Several had drowned that night. He knew Wei. Tried not to think of Wei. Thought of Wei. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to read with these fine other readers tonight. And now back to Andrew.
You do not yell at lions. Thank you, Laura Glenn Lewis. Thank you, Leland Chook, Jenny Shank, Lindsay Ellis, T.S. McAdams. What a lineup. What a great job I have, and so generous of you folks to read for us tonight. Thank you to Leslie Brody for celebrating our community. I'm dedicating tonight's reading to our late friend, Al Young, novelist, poet, bluesman, political comrade, two-time California State Poet Laureate. I already miss Al. Thanks to all of you for your continued support of the magazine, whether as a subscriber, reader, or contributor. The next issue and another reading arrive in 6 months. Good luck, everybody, and good night.